can hear me online. Good morning. How's everybody doing today? Thanks for coming. And yeah, let's get started. So I'm Tyler. I teach at Clark College in Washington State. And I want to talk today about what we've been doing there, integrating math and science. And I've been kind of collating a bunch of activities I've used doing that and put them in an online activity book that's available now for free, which is that QR code there. If you want to access it, we'll take a look at it more later. There'll be more opportunities if you don't catch the QR code right now. It's an old picture before my beard got longer. So today I want to think, I'll talk to you a little bit about the context that I'm teaching in. Want to introduce this resource that I'm sharing with you. And it's the resource is all saved as Google Docs, because my goal is to make it adaptable for anyone who's using it. And then I want to think a little bit about how you might adapt it. Because my goal is that by making it adaptable, it will give you more control over how you're teaching, and it will give you the flexibility you need to meet your students where they're at, and to help them maybe think in different ways. So that's what I want to try and think about today, is like, how can we help them engage in the content in different ways, as we're sort of asking them to manage more than one thing at the same time. So that is Clark College right there. Some spring daffodils, I think. And what in Washington State, I don't know if anybody's familiar, we have a high school plus option. So adults can earn a high school diploma as well as an alternative to taking the GED. So most of our students show up saying, oh, I need the GED. And then we explain to them this option where they can get the high school diploma by bringing all the high school credits they already have with them. We can award them high school credit for work experience. And then the classes they take with me or any of the other instructors, they earn high school credits for those. And then we award them a diploma once they've earned all the credits they need to meet the state standards. So this was set up by the Office of Public Instruction and State Board of Community and Technical Colleges in Washington State. It's a great option for students. I wasn't familiar with it until I moved to Washington for this job. I think it is an excellent option. If you know people who work in state governments thinking about these kinds of things, encourage them to look at that model in Washington State. I think it offers students way more flexibility, and it offers them options that can work way better for many of them than the GED test does. Some students still take the GED test. Sometimes it just makes more sense for them. I've had students who are homeschooled all the way through high school and have 0 high school credits, but are ready to take tests. So they just take the GED test. So I think that flexibility, those options, I think are all about what we always think about when we're trying to help our adult learners. So in that context, then, one of these things we're doing to try and help students get the high school credits they need to graduate is we have contextualized or integrated classes. And I don't think today we have to quibble about the difference between integration and contextualization. But what that means is this class that I've been teaching for a long time now, math and science, students get both a math credit and a science credit for it. So they're moving more quickly toward graduation because we're able to sort of double up on what they're learning. But it requires then to think about how can we help them meet these sort of outcomes simultaneously, right? And I think for the context of anyone working on the teaching students who are studying for the GED, I think this is still very applicable because students still need to take a math test and a science test, right? And the ability to engage them in those kinds of thinking together is obviously helpful for them if you're moving them along more quickly. We all know our learners have busy lives. They have important things they want to do. You know, their dream was never to take the GED. And we're here to try and help them move on to the bigger and cooler and better things they're going to do in their lives. And I think additionally, this is a very natural fit. It asks us to think about science in quantitative ways, which is how scientists think about the world often, right? And it asks us to take math instead of as something purely abstract and look at math as something that's applied, look at math as something that maybe humans created as a way to interact with the world and make sense of the world around them, right? So that's the context that all of this is coming from. So after having taught this class for 6 years or something now, I was kind of pulling together different resources and struggling to find stuff that would fit this context, because there's stuff out there for high school and there's stuff out there for grade school and there's stuff out there for adult learners, but it's not math and science contextualized. So through lots of adaptation and pulling together different things, I pulled together what I'm calling sort of an activity book of some of these activities I've used. And it's available now on OER Commons. Again, that QR code will take you there, or you can just search on OER Commons if people are familiar with that. So available whenever you want to look at it. We'll look at it, some of it more today. And well, let's go on. Have people used OER Commons before? No, there's not. No, okay. So are people familiar with the idea of like Creative Commons, an open license? Seeing some heads nodding. So oftentimes when someone creates something, they say all rights reserved. Basically, they say, this is my intellectual property. You can't copy it, right? You can't do something with it without my permission. The idea of a Creative Commons license is that I make it available to people to copy, to adapt for their own uses, and I'm not going to come sue you if you do that. So for this Creative Commons license, I'm just asking that you give me attribution if you take this and make it something else and share it with other people, which I'd love for you to do. If you do new things with it, please share it with other people. Just give me attribution, continue to share it as a Creative Commons license, and don't sell it. So that's available, and we'll take a look at some of this stuff some more. And that's what, so open educational resources, OER. Sorry, let me make sure that I explain all my like alphabet soup that I'm going to throw at you. OER, open educational resources, are educational resources that are openly licensed. They have a Creative Commons license, right? So it's something that you can, right? As educators, we have some latitude in using copyrighted materials in our classes and copying things, right? But an open educational resource means that you have complete freedom, right, within those very minimal restrictions of, oh, make sure you don't, sell this, or if you're going to share it with someone else, you share it with the same license. So lots of stuff, other things available on OER Commons, the same idea, openly licensed resources. So let's get into some of the math, because what I want to like I said, what I want to think about today a little bit is this flexibility that we have in how we present things for our students to do, and how that impacts how they think about what they're doing, how it impacts how difficult or easy the tasks may be. So then how we want to use that flexibility that I'm trying to embed within these resources. How can we sort of marshal this flexibility to the best advantage of our students? Welcome, folks. There are still some seats available up here. Please come in and have a seat, get comfortable. It's going to be a long session, so you want to sit down. No. Okay, so have people heard of the idea of notice and wonder when teaching math? I'm seeing quite a few heads nodding. So take a moment. Look at this graph here. Think about what you notice and wonder. Give you a minute. If you're here in person, maybe just chat with someone next to you about what you noticed or wondered. If you're online, drop something in the chat. What did you notice? What did you wonder about this? Okay, I'm going to interrupt y'all, even though you're having great conversations. This is the, like, this is always the, do we have a comment in the chat?
Our internet friends have noticed some things, so I'll start by sharing what they noticed. Somebody said the bars are increasing. Somebody went further and said the temperature is steadily rising. And then there's somebody who says they can tell their numbers, but they're too blind to see what they are. So the online group might be relying on in-person people for visual. And then somebody says the graph rose during the Industrial Revolution and then briefly, yeah, there's some interpretation, and then briefly went down and is steadily rising since 1980. Thank you, online folks, for adding to the chat.
Yeah, great thoughts. And I mean, that question of like being, having stuff that's visible, like that is like some of those numbers are really light. And these are like very important things to keep in mind. I copied this graph from New York Times Learning Network, I think, right? But those are important things to think about. Did anybody else want to add something? Did other people have thoughts they wanted to throw in there? I can move on to, okay.
I just noticed the 1940s and wondered why it popped up, and all I could think of was World War II. And it was global. So,
this is not from online, but here in the back of the room, we discussed the horizontal bar. We see the red bars and the blue bars, but there's this black horizontal bar that we were wondering about.
Great, right? So what are our students going to notice here, right? What kinds of things are they going to have to recognize to interpret this graph? What do people think? So we've got this horizontal bar, right? Why? So I'm hearing people say it's a baseline. Yeah. We could also call it an x-axis. Online, they're saying we should look at the title of the graph. They want us to look at the title of the graph. Okay, the title of the graph, global average temperature compared to the middle of the 20th century. So what is our baseline? Okay, here we got a couple hands up.
Students can also interpret that horizontal line as a independent variable.
Okay, so you're thinking about, we could look at this graph and think about what are dependent and independent variables, right? So this is another connection we can make, and also a really important connection to make between math and science, because we use both those terms in math and science. Sometimes they line up perfectly. Other times there's a little bit more nuance to them depending on which discipline we're in. Yeah, exactly. These are the exact kind of things we need to think about, right?
So for the math portion, they would be able to study about or learn about integers, negative and positive. So as you said, like Industrial Revolution, the environment had some effect, which is the science part. And then the temperature is increasing, so positive.
Yeah, right. So another application here, students need to be able to understand integers. So if this is our x-axis, right? If we can see our x-axis, do we have a y-axis on this graph? Oh, was there a hand up as well? Oh yeah.
I'm just going to say what I think majority of the people who I teach would say. They're going to say, oh, that's zero. So it's 0 degrees. So how could it go down to negative 0.25 degrees when that's not what it's talking about? It's talking about the percent of change. So, or the change, the change, that's not a zero. But most of them are always taught that your zero, the x-axis is going through your zero.
Yeah. So yeah, this is if this is the average, or we're comparing, right, to the middle of the 20th century. Right now we're thinking about change. So what is zero here does not mean a temperature outside of 0 degrees Fahrenheit, right? We're thinking a change of 0 degrees versus what we're looking at, right? So this is, oh, got another online.
The temperatures are relative to 1950.
If that's middle of the 20th century, 1950. So in Celsius. Ooh, does it say that? Oh yeah, it says it way up here. Good eye. Yes, up here it says. I almost tripped and died. That would have been a different kind of session. Okay, so yeah, good, right? All sorts of detail to notice in here, right? These are the exact kind of things that we want to help our students recognize, right? What are our units? What are our axes, right? We've got an x-axis on here. We don't even have a visible y-axis on here, right? But it's the temperature, right? If we can recognize here that we're measuring temperature on the y-axis, right? And we have to have some understanding of negative integers to make sense of what's going to be going on down here, right? If we look at the lowest point here in terms of variance of the temperature below the average, we could talk about, well, about what would this be? And that's going to force us to think through that we've basically got a number line in our y-axis going into negative numbers. All right, great thoughts, right? I think the thinking that this helps our students do is kind of clear after that conversation. And I would also say something like this, very little structure here, right? It's very sort of open. Students are just going to look at this and think about, what do I notice? What do I wonder? So this idea, I'm playing with different words to try and figure out what I've been thinking about. And one is structure. So I'm thinking about like, what are the structures that we have here? Something like this I see as having very little structure. We could talk through this one here, but honestly, I think I'll move on. Another interesting couple graphs. These are all available in the OER activity book as well. So you'll find them in there. So let's move on here. This is something else that's in the OER activity book. And this, I think, is going to be an example of something with a little bit more structure. So, okay, let's see if I can control the mouse over here, looking backward. So this takes me to this is the handout for this particular activity. Kristen, is this showing online now? That's showing online. Perfect. Okay. So this is the handout for this one activity in the activity book. Let's see if I can oh boy. Let's just leave it like this for a second. No. The weirdest thing ever to like look around at a board going the other way while trying to use the mouse. Okay. All right, there. We can see. So now you can see the first line of the portion of the handout where students are going to start doing some work here. And then we can see this table at the top. So what is the table? What is the table showing us? So I'm hearing area of forest, size of forest, and trends here in the room. What else are What else is this showing us? It's divided by continents and different periods of time, right? Every 10 years, so by decade, we're looking at this, right? So then if we move down to we move down a little bit here, then it's going to ask us to think about net change. So what would net change mean in this situation? Rate. So we could think about rate of change, maybe, which could eventually be a slope. If we, looking at this table here, which is basically where students would go next, there's a couple examples in there. 1990 to 1999 in Africa, what are we seeing here as so it's negative 33. And what does that mean in terms of this context we're looking at? We're seeing a negative 33 for Africa in the 1990s. Deforestation, yeah. The amount of forest in Africa decreased by 33 million hectares. You're noticing here millions of hectares we're talking about, right? In that decade, right? So, and we can find that by looking at our 1990 column compared to our 2000 column, right? And then we have to follow our formula where we've got the new minus the original. And if we follow new minus original, it's going to give us a negative if it's a net change that's a decrease, and a positive if it's a net change that's an increase. Dots. Is there a way to zoom in? You're saying, is it kind of small online? Okay. I gotta right here. Is that? Better. Keep going. Awesome. Cool. All right. Maybe let's put our student hat on, which some of you I think we're already doing. What would students be thinking about? What kind of math are they doing? Would have to be able to do here. Range, thinking about ranges between different times. Subtracting, getting negative numbers, right, as well, right? So back to sort of similar to where we're looking at the graph of temperature change, right? We have to be able to handle negative numbers. Okay, so great thought here, right? I don't just throw this at them without any introduction like I did to you. I threw this at you without any introduction because you're teachers. Okay, so for people online, we had a thought here about do students know what deforestation is, right? And then another thought then about positive and negative numbers, right? So to the deforestation question, usually I introduce this with a video, right? Which I skipped today in the interest of time. But usually I'm going to show people a video. I've had a couple different videos. One is like a satellite time lapse that shows deforestation happening in both Madagascar and in the Amazon. And then another one is a little bit longer video from the news organization Vox that goes into some of the changes in policy in Brazil and how that's impacted deforestation. They talk about how these political changes in Brazil either changed policies around land use and either increased or decreased deforestation. So it kind of gets into some more detailed examples of what's leading to these changes. So I definitely present that to them because I want students to use the context to help make sense of the math, right? Because I think that, for me, I think that's what's most powerful about this approach for helping students learn these things is I can present them abstract, decontextualized negative numbers, right? Which usually throws students for a loop because we just don't think in negative number ways often, right? In the world. Yeah.
Are our students familiar with continents? She's heard many interesting things in terms of geography. And then another question, do you share the titles links for the videos you use in your activity book? Sorry to be greedy.
No, great question. So I show a world map first that's kind of colored by regions to make the connection as clear as possible between what are the titles on here and what are the regions if we look at a world map. And then the links to the videos I've used are all in the activity book, but I would encourage people to nose around and find whatever seems like a great way to get students thinking about these topics, right? There is, so much information out there. I think whatever you find that kind of captures your students' interest best and leads into thinking about these things in quantitative or mathematical ways. So this activity itself continues, which we're going to look at in a second. But I think I would mention before we move on, right, filling out this table, right? Students are having to think about using a formula. They're having to think about when do you end up with an answer that's a negative number versus a positive number, right? How does the order that we write numbers in when we subtract impact it? I have them work in groups or have them check with each other for sure to be like, okay, did you write your equation the same way or not? So we can talk about what are true equations and what are not true equations, and also what's a correct answer or not. But here I see this as having a lot of structure, right? It's very sort of clear. You fill in the blank with each thing. There's a thing that goes in each one, right? A lot more structure than our notice and wonder activity. All right. Okay. All right. So then one thing that ends up happening after they've filled out that table is then the next step is we figure out what is the global net forest area change by decade. So first it was divided up by continents, and then we have to figure it out by decades. You kind of have to add together all the continents and figure out what's the global change for each one of those decades, right? And we end up with something like, I think the 90s is like negative 73, the 2000s is like negative 53, and the 2010s is like negative 40, something like that, right? So there was a greater decrease in forest area in the 90s, and then a smaller decrease in the 2000s, and then an even smaller decrease in the 2010s, but still decreases throughout, which in itself is just a great conversation I find with students because it forces us to use really specific language describing what we're looking at. And students are talking about, well, no, the forest area is increasing because we see things going up. Like, oh, well, is there more forest area or not? It forces us to think really carefully. But then we graph it. And I'm gonna date myself here. When I was a child, I used to get Highlights magazine. You do that activity where you're like, what's the difference between the two pictures? Yeah. Great. I'm glad to hear that there are still children out there enjoying Highlights magazine. It's an important part of my childhood. So I want you to play the what's the difference between the two pictures game. What's the difference between these two graph setups here that students would have to go to and graph -73, -53, -40? What's the difference between the graph on the left and the graph on the right? The numbers on the side. Tell me more. Tell me more. So numbers on the side here. The one on the right doesn't have numbers on the y-axis. So on the graph on the left, we've got numbers coming down the y-axis here. 0, -10, -20, -30, -40, so on. And in the graph on the right, we don't have any. Yeah. Oh, wow. You're finding differences that the artist didn't intend to be different on there. Nobody saw that. Nobody saw that difference. No. The answer I was hoping for was the numbers on the y-axis. Someone must have sabotaged my graphs before. I don't know who was working in my. Someone was in my group chat that I didn't know was in there. So okay. So what I had changed here, and what I'd changed intentionally, I used to use the graph on the left with my students, right? So let's imagine they have to graph a forest area change by decade. That's what it should say. Of -73, right? So they would come to this graph and say, well, you've got a 0, and we'd graph it as a bar down to -73 or something, right? And then for 2000, -50 something, then for the 2010s, -40. What would be different for students going to that second graph without anything on the y-axis? Okay, so students have to create the quantity. They have to put something on.
Yeah, they have to ask themselves questions about how to represent the data that they want to. What is a reasonable increment for those? Does 10 degrees Celsius make sense? Maybe 15 makes more sense.
Right, so they have to think about their interval on the y-axis, right, of how much is each line or each space going to be worth.
Well, they have to decide, they have to recognize on yours, you start 0 at the top and then go the negative numbers. I could imagine many students starting 0 at the bottom and then the negative numbers climbing up.
So would there be an issue if we start with 0 at the bottom and go up with numbers trying to graph our data? We've got, so that would be putting us into positive numbers in a conventional way to create that graph, right?
And also when they plot the ones on the right, it would be a steeper line than the ones on the left because the interval on this one is per decade. So it would be. Yeah, the line on the right one would be steeper.
You think, yeah. If they use a different interval, it's going to change how steep. Yeah, totally. If they use a different interval, it's going to change how steep a line may or may not look, right? Which I think is another really important thing to talk about, of like, two students could graph this completely correctly using different intervals, and it could look a little different, right? Which doesn't mean, it's an important thing I think for students to notice. That doesn't mean it's wrong, right? But I've definitely seen so many students start here with 0, right? Because this is where we almost always start our graphs, right? Put 0 in the bottom left corner, and then count up and count to the right. So it becomes a great conversation about quadrants, right? And which quadrant are we in? Oh, it's a quadrant we often don't graph in, where I've got positive numbers on my x-axis and negative on my y, right?
Up isn't negative. And somebody online disagrees, said, sure it is. It's just less negative.
I mean, when we're thinking about once this gets graphed and we've graphed sort of, if we graph it as bars, right? We've got a bar coming down to 70 something, a bar coming down to 50 something, a bar coming down to 40 something. That's exactly the way I often hear some students describe it. When they're searching for the language to describe the situation that they haven't really wrestled with before, they'll be like, well, it's less negative, which, yeah, right, because I'm pushing them to use this really careful language that we use in science, right, in math. I think I had a hand up over here, and then yeah.
Just really quick. I think oftentimes just like they were talking about yesterday, we want to make sure that they're doing it right. But it'd be interesting to see it's okay for them to make the mistake and do it wrong, and then have that deep conversation about if we look at the different variety of graphs, what are similar about these graphs, what are different about these graphs, and which one is more applicable. And just having that space to have that conversation is always delicious.
Yeah, and like even if they graph 0 with negative numbers going up, like they can still be representing some of this trend that's going on, right? So I've been adopting the word conventional a lot of times whenever I feel like it's applicable, because that also is a good reminder, I think, for all of us that a lot of this math stuff we kind of made up, and we do it this way just because we've always done it this way. And that's part of what's going on, is we're learning this is the conventional way that we create this graph, right? There were a couple hands over here. I'll go back here and then up to you. Yeah.
That idea of starting at 0 and going up and being more negative as you go up opens the door to a conversation I have with my students sometimes about the fact that people can use accurate data in a misleading way, either intentionally or unintentionally. And as informed individuals in the world, they need to be able to recognize when that's going on, because it's going to look different. It's just, if you just glance at it, it's going to look like something different is happening. They didn't lie. You just didn't take all the time to actually read the words that went with it. And so that's a conversation that I like to poke my students about and make their brains pop a little.
But I was just thinking about it. You could have a conversation. What if the title said annual global forest lost? Then the numbers could go up. And so it's all about the words in the title that tells you which direction to go.
Totally, right? And that's, I think, using the language really carefully becomes such an important thing when we start contextualizing this math, especially in science and in these really specific situations. We have to start thinking about like how we have to start helping our students engage in like some scientific disciplinary literacy of how do scientists use language, and they use it really, really carefully.
Cutting down of the forest change weather patterns too. Yeah.
Oh, and this can lead into so much, right? This can lead into so many applications. You're talking about like the impact of cutting down forest on like climate, right? Like so many ways that you can go with this into exploring other areas, right? Okay, so I think in the interest of time, I want to move on. So this is I'm gonna show you one more thing, and then I'm gonna give you some time to think here. So this one is not something I've created. I actually don't have it in the activity book, but it's available on Robert Kaplinsky's website, which is in my references at the end of the presentation, which I'll upload on Whova. Is anybody familiar with Robert Kaplinsky? There's some folks. He has some really cool activities on his website, asking students to problem solve with math, right? So this is one I've used with my students before. I think I'm just gonna talk at you for a second about it, because I want to make sure I give you time to explore some of this stuff here, and we can chat about it before we're done today. So this is a sinkhole in Guatemala, right? And the questions that he poses to his students are, how much material would they need to fill the sinkhole? How much will it cost to fill the sinkhole? So maybe just real quickly, what sort of math are students going to have to do to solve, or what sort of math might students do? So scale, volume, geometry, right? And through all of this, they're going to be modeling, right? They're modeling something that's happening in the world. So they're going to have to, when they're doing volume, they're going to have to think about, well, what volume is this? Once I had a couple, my like overachieving group of students at one table was like, well, we were looking at this because there's a couple other photos. They were like, we're looking at these photos and it looks kind of like a cylinder, but also like between a cylinder and a cone. So like we like came up with our like estimates of the diameter, which you can kind of do based on some of like the roads and stuff around it. And then we calculated for a cylinder and we calculated for a cone and we averaged the two. And that's our, yeah, right. Overachieving table. But I mean, that like, what a great thought process for them to talk out to the rest of the class too, of saying like most of the students were saying cylinder and they're like, well, we saw this. So to model it, we thought maybe we should take the average of these two.
I don't think anybody said this term, a circular pyramid is.
A circular pyramid. Exactly. And then if we go to the formula sheet that I have, then we could say like, okay, well, what do we have that we might be able to calculate that? What's going to give us the closest thing to a circular pyramid? So on his website, then he has this problem solving framework, which has gone through many iterations. Like I said, I would encourage you to check out his website. Great activities. And then he uses this handout for students, right? And the questions on here are, what problem are you trying to figure out? I really like his estimate thing in the top right that asks students to come up with an estimate that's too low and an estimate that's too high before they calculate anything. I think that's a great sort of student setting parameters for what they're expecting, right? And trying to get students to think about what do I think my answer is going to be roughly before they start doing calculations, because it's such a good check-in point when they make a, calculation error along the way that might drastically change their result if they've already thought about what makes sense as an answer. And then what info do you already know? What do you need to know about the problem? For his activities, he really encourages not giving any information to students until they ask for it. So push them to say, what do you need to know? So then we start talking about like, well, we have to figure out the dimensions of the sinkhole. How are we going to figure that out? And then we can estimate it based, like on the size of the roads, or there's a car in one of the photos. And then in the end, there's some estimates of the size of the sinkhole from different news sources that we can come back with to compare with like what students came up with. And then what's your conclusion? And then the back of the page is space for students to do some work.
So when you teach this lesson, do they go online as well to find out like the different sizes, find out the history of the sinkhole of Guatemala? You mentioned a car, so do they find out like the sizes of that car?
I haven't ever had them do any additional research with this. But I mean, I think the possibilities for that stuff is endless, right? Depending on the time you have to invest in it. Totally, right? You can turn it into an activity that you incorporate some digital literacy into, right? And thinking about, because there were different news agencies reported different dimensions for the size of the sinkhole as well. So then there's still, there's still not like a definitive answer in the end, even if you go to that extent. But totally. And I've taught some of these things, not this specific one, but I've taught some of this stuff on completely online as well. So I've tried to incorporate like students going to search for information and then coming back. Okay. So to my thought earlier on structure, right? We started off with the notice and wonder. Very, very little structure, right? We looked at the activity there that I've got in my book on changing on deforestation. A lot more structure. Robert Kaplinski's approach here, someplace in between, probably, right? He's removed a lot of structure from this, right? He has not given students a list of things to calculate. Students still need to think about this. Definitely an activity I do in groups. So again, like I think that like these changes in structure while some of the stuff like the graph having numbers on the y-axis or not, I've definitely given some of my students a graph with the numbers on the y-axis because I knew they were going to get really, really frustrated and it was going to be unproductive for them to get a graph without the numbers on the y-axis. So there's been moments where I would be like, oh yeah, here's yours. And because I didn't want them to sit there and like have an awful experience in my classroom, right? And then they maybe graph it and get to be like, oh, well, this is how I graphed mine. Like, what did you do? And they have like a little something to share with their students. So, I mean, there's certainly some of the structure can certainly impact like how easy or difficult, if we want to use those words, some of these activities are. But what else? I don't know, if we change that structure, what else, what other impact could it have? If we start removing some of this structure for students?
So for me, I think when you begin to remove the structure, it allows for students to be more creative and show their thinking, which offers a great opportunity for students to compare their thinking and seeing the connections amongst their peers and their peers' thinking if it's less structured.
Yeah, completely agree. It's way more of thinking activities, right? Way more problem solving. Other thoughts? Yeah.
They're going to make more mistakes, which is good because then they'll learn from their mistakes.
And we'll also see just like way bigger differences, right? Whether they're mistakes or not, we'll see way bigger differences. And when we're modeling these kinds of situations, we'll see models that maybe are a little more careful and some that are less careful, right? Which again isn't necessarily a mistake, right? Like I completely agree, definitely going to find mistakes, right? But that isn't necessarily a mistake, but it goes into this thinking of like, well, how carefully do we think about the way we model these things? Any other thoughts on sort of removing structure? Yeah.
It helps them really build their abstract way of thinking, because a lot of the times in math, I mean, you do the same things over and over again and you expect the same answer.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think we're helping them build other ways of thinking when we're doing this, right? And we're helping them see that math isn't just about finding definitive answers that that the teacher can say, like, this is exactly the right answer that I knew you were going to come to, right? Something like this. No, there's not one exact answer that I know all my students have to come to. We have to think real carefully through, like, well, how'd you think about it? How'd you get there?
Do students get frustrated? Because I'm not teaching math or science, but do they get frustrated when there is not a definitive answer, or does it depend on how you set it up and they know ahead of time? How do you set that up so that they don't get frustrated?
Yes and yes. Some students definitely get frustrated, right? Students, I mean, we know how sort of how much so many of our students bring this, like, I don't know, I don't think it's an overstatement to say sort of like educational trauma with them into our classrooms, right? From their experiences. And if you're thinking about like trauma-informed approaches, right? Oftentimes someone can feel a need, give me like something that I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. Like, don't, so I agree, we have to be really thoughtful, I think, about how we do these kinds of things and ask students to move into much more ambiguous territory, right? I think if I just throw these kinds of things at students, some students definitely shut down, right? So I think part of it is a gradual shift. And that's where I'm trying to think about some of these things of like, how can we do this gradually? How can we play with structure where it gives students the space to start problem solving, but doesn't overwhelm them with, like, I've certainly had teachers before too, who were like, I think thought they were being like really, really progressive. And they're like, you're going to make all the decisions. And I was just overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't know. Like, what I just started the class. I don't know what I don't know yet, kind of thing. So I think it's definitely possible to do too much of that. and not offer our students enough structure, enough sort of support into this. But I think we can play with it. I think something like the notice and wonder stuff, I've never had students like shut down from that. They can sit there and notice and wonder things, right? But as soon as they get the sense that, oh, there is a right answer that I have to find, and then a lot of them will put pressure. So I think it takes time and it takes sensitivity to like, how do we adjust these structures so that we find that sort of sweet spot where they're capable of doing something they didn't think they were capable of doing.
Someone online answered your question. She said, absolutely, my students want it to be right, get a check mark, and feel validated.
And I mean, I think we can also think about what makes something right in this situation, which is a worthwhile question, right? Because then we're going to start thinking like scientists do and be like, well, is there one right answer for a scientist exploring something like this? Like, no, when scientists model the world, they have they have a range of answers that they're thinking about of like, well, we think it's somewhere between here and there. So I think that's another type of thinking that this contextualization or integration helps push students toward, of thinking, well, a lot of people, when they're applying math, are in a world where there's not going to be one right answer. And they're going to have to think about, they're coming up with their best projection of what they're expecting in the world. All right. So I wanted to leave some time here at the end. So we've got 17 minutes. I wanted to leave some time at the end for you all to explore some of this stuff. So this QR code, now I'm gonna confuse everybody, I think. This QR code takes you to a sort of worksheet that it's gonna ask you these questions, right? This worksheet is gonna ask you these questions. If you click in the top right 3 dots and say make a copy, and you have the Google Docs app on your phone, you'll be able to edit and have your own copy with this worksheet with these questions. Because what I'd like us to do is think about these questions in relation to some of the stuff from the activity book. So once people have had a chance to open up this, we'll open up the activity book and we'll see if we can make all these documents on your phone open at the same time work. All right. Starting to wonder whether I should have done the worksheet at all. Don't think so. But anyway. Oh, it's under share. You have to hit on share. Oh, thank you. Okay, so depending on your phone, you may need to click share and export, then make a copy to be able to make a copy that you could fill out. All right. And it looks like people are done with this one. So I'm going to go to the next page. Whoops, there. Okay, so this QR code, here's where I confuse you. This QR code takes you to the OER that I talked about at the very beginning, right? So now this one will take you there. So if you can manage 2 different things that you're looking at on your phone, that's what I'm trying to do. So this will take you to OER Commons. From OER Commons, you say open resource, and it takes you to the Google document that is the resource. Yep, this is the OER right here. This is the QR code for the OER. Yes, and I think we've got about 15 minutes right now. So I'm just gonna give you 5, 8 minutes to start nosing around in here, to start thinking about what is it that you would like to do, what applications might some of these activities have in your classes or schools or settings. you not able to open that up? Oh, if you need to, you were able to do it when you stood closer to the. Yeah, go. Yeah, so this will take you to the OER textbook. Exactly. Oh, okay, I can go back to that. No, not a problem. Thanks for letting me know. There we go. Is it complete chaos? Did people figure out what I was trying to get you to do? Were you able to like find the book and stuff? Okay, I'm seeing people smiling, which is usually a good sign. I'm not seeing tears and like no chairs being thrown or anything. So I think I'll take that as like positive. They're not yet. I'll add them. The slides are not yet up on Hoova, but I will upload them. I may or may not have been finishing the presentation like minutes before we started. So the slides will be up.
Oh yeah, don't forget to edit on your chart too.
Thanks for reminding me again. It's a great opportunity for me to embrace my own mistakes and learn from mistakes. I love it when my students can do that for me. So yeah. That was my TA who created this. People able to access the activity book? Okay, yeah. If I go to so I had gone back and forth a lot of times on like how I wanted to share this like activity book and stuff. And I've kept it as a Google Doc, as I mentioned, because I want to give you sort of maximum flexibility with it so that you can make a copy of any of these things and then adapt it, right? And think about this question of like structure, right? And like, because some of the activities, right, like that deforestation one or other ones are very structured, which could be a good thing, but it also isn't necessarily going to push our students to do the kind of thinking that sometimes we want them to do, So I would encourage you to think about like, how can you adjust the structure in these activities to in a way that helps your students sort of think the most they can.
Great thought online here. So Jessica online, is this okay to share? Oh, okay. A couple people shared. Jessica says, I had a thought about wanting to validate students without the expectation that they get the right answer. During the gradual approach of making students comfortable with more ambiguity in math problems, it would be helpful to use the favorite no strategy of acknowledging the good thinking students showed, even if they didn't get the right answer. And Jessica, I know about the favorite no strategy, so I'm going to elaborate. Does anybody else? Okay, I've heard of this. Thank you for sharing, online friend Jessica. I think sharing a couple of different wrong answers and having students discuss their favorite no or their favorite wrong answer is a method that I've heard, and I think that's what she's talking about. Jessica, tell me if I'm getting this right, but she just wanted to share that. And then also somebody else is very excited about your resources that you're sharing.
Thank you. I love that favorite no strategy. I'd never heard of that one before. That sounds like such a good strategy to help people value the thinking that's going on, right? Okay, or the teacher could select a favorite no. Yeah. No, I mean, I think the more that we get our students showing their thinking, the more we can definitely find those moments where even if they make a mistake at some point, we can validate all sorts of really creative things they do. Because that's something I notice, right? As I take structure away, I see my students have so much creativity in their problem solving in quantitative situations. I'm always impressed by the creative solutions that my students come up with where I wouldn't have thought of solving something in some way. And then I follow and I get confused when I walk up and I'm like, oh no, what is the student doing? Like, did they completely misunderstand? And then I follow it and I'm like, oh wow, actually, I see I follow your reasoning here. I see how you thought, what you recognized in this situation and how you're making sense of it. Do people, so we've only got about 5 minutes left or so. Do people have thoughts here on, oh, I'm still here. Do people have thoughts on any of these questions that I brought up? Did you look through, did you see any activities in the book that you're thinking, oh, this is something I'd like to do? Did you think about things that would be easy or difficult for students? What supports or structures you might add or remove? How you keep students focused on the big picture and how you keep their math grounded in the context? Anything here or anything else, whatever.
Let the students figure out what they want to figure out.
The students figure out what they want to figure out. Tell me more.
Well, we've seen a video last night where the students started figuring out what kind of data they wanted to research. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely have students when we're doing contextualized things start coming up with their own questions, right? And they think could we ask this question? Could we do this, right? And sometimes unfortunately my class has too much structure and I can't allow that. I'm still looking for ways to offer that flexibility and honor that inspiration and motivation that students show. Because yeah, if a student has struggled with math or never thought of themselves as mathematical, when they have that moment, oh my gosh, that's the most valuable thing. I want to throw out all the plans I had for my class if I can value that. Other thoughts here? All right, we'll come here and there.
So I was looking at the scatter plots, the bears and seagull behavior, and it made me think of the salmon. My students are really interested in earth science, especially food webs and keystone species. And so trying to figure out how to do an activity with that about how salmon, they go upstream to mate and then they go back down. And just trying to figure out something similar to this for the earth science portion.
For that activity, I show a brief video, and it's from where the researchers work in Alaska, and they're looking at they're studying bears in Alaska, and it's a video of the bears fishing and eating salmon, and then the seagulls coming and picking at it. So yeah, I mean, I think that would lead really well into something like that.
I was just thinking about the sinkhole example that you used, and I loved the worksheet afterwards and estimating like having the low and the high. But one of the things that it didn't say on there, which you could add more structure and have it or not have it, was units. And so then when you're converting units, like you can have such a huge difference, and that can really throw things off if you don't think about that part.
Yeah, units become a really important thing, like when we're looking at contextualized situations, for sure. And that's like something I have to like constantly bring up with students, like what unit are we using, and like or where are we going to use?
We've done some stuff before where we look at populations growth, but also where it's more than doubled. So they know the percent change. Oh, you can't have more than 100% change. Well, yes, you can. And so we're addressing that there is more than 100%.
Yeah, I've got an activity in there looking at actually population change with salmon, but it's specifically around like the area I'm in Southwest Washington. And because some of those changes from year to year were drastic, I ended up having to wrestle with that question. And that's where I ended up going, was like first asking the students, have any of these populations doubled? And then when they, when they recognized that, then we compared it to our population change, and we could get to this point of recognizing like, oh, 100% population change means that it's doubled. So then like more than 100% mean, and there's one that goes up like 5 times or something. So then students are like, oh, that's way more than double. This is 3 or 4 times. No, totally. I think that's a great connection.
But also thinking about the sinkhole, so they can also use the concept of scale. So what is the scale of this real hole, and what is the scale they can use to solve for the problem?
Oh yeah, I don't think I've got anything in there explicitly looking at scale, but I've definitely been trying to figure that out, because I feel like it's such a great mathematical thing to have to play around with, and so many different calculations that have to be made along the way, but actually hopefully mean something. Right? Yeah.
I would like to go back to that deforestation. You can actually like extend it to discuss the percentage increase and decrease of deforestation. Yes, yeah, from one decade to another.
Awesome. Okay, I think we are. Anything else online? No? Okay, I think we are out of time, right? We're going to 9:10. So, thanks so much for coming, folks. Oh, before you leave, we want to talk about that. I'm open if someone wants to be a reviewer of this book. I'm very open to you being a reviewer of this book. And actually, I undersold your compensation. Not only will you receive a thank you, you will also end up in the acknowledgments. Your name will be in the acknowledgments as a reviewer. Just saying. Your name will be on the internet forever. If you're interested, complete honesty, if you're interested, if you use this and you have thoughts, reach out and let me know. I'm very interested to hear like what people do with this. My goal is that it's something that's adaptable for your settings. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for coming. I'm honored that you spent all this time with me. Thank you. And have a great rest of the conference.